All right, Keith has a question here. Let me read it out loud. So I've had some experiences, as you know, but I still don't feel like I have it. I still feel like an individual. Any suggestions? So what stands out to me as I read that, thank you, Keith, it's actually there might be a solution within your question. So you don't have it because you are it. So you can't have what you are. You can only be it. So if it feels like I lost it or I have it, that's awakeness believing thought again. Awakeness believing that it's a Keith or a Boh. And so part of the clearing process, and really what's more primary than that, is the acceptance aspect. Sorry. The acceptance aspect of post-awakening is recognizing that when there was clarity, that it couldn't have been a Keith that recognized true nature, because Keith doesn't have true nature. Keith is imaginary. So what recognized true nature, was awakeness. So part of what's required when we, just habitually re-misidentify with the idea of being a separate self, or Keith or Boh, Annette, James, is to notice that that's happening. Clarity's the only thing. It's not the perfect language, but there isn't any perfect language. Clarity can notice cloudiness. It's the only thing that can notice cloudiness. Cloudiness can't notice cloudiness, because cloudiness is just an appearance. But clarity is the open space that everything is appearing within and composed of, is awakeness itself. So first, in noticing, oh, I've believed thought again, recognize that already there's clarity present, because without clarity, that would just be a unconscious default. The momentum of it wouldn't occur to you, awakeness, that you've believed thought, because you would just be living from that view. And so that's an important thing to recognize at first. You're like, okay, I believe thought. And then you see, well, who is it that's believed a thought? When I recognize that there's only true nature and I'm true nature, and it can't be a Keith, it has to be awakeness that recognizes that. So seeing that what notices thought, what notices anything, is noticing, is awakeness itself. And so, is it true that a Keith could believe a thought? No. Keith is the thought that awakeness is believing in. It's, like Fred says, it's backwards. And so that's, the second step is seeing that it can't be a Keith that's believing thought now. It has to be awakeness. And the more and more that's clarified, the more you just meet every moment as awakeness, as the moment. That's already what's happening. But the more we meet experience authentically, rather than through this limited idea, the easier it will be to not believe thought when it comes up, because it's just another appearance. As clearing goes on, thoughts and stories and beliefs, opinions, positions, it their significance is no more. They have no more reality or weight or value than a bird chirping outside, or the wind passing through the trees. It's just another phenomena. But the way that the glue of habitually misidentifying with thought and this story of Keith, that glue dissolves, the habit slows down and loses power, the more and more we just come back to this foundational insight that was recognized in realization, that, oh, there's just awakeness. And I'm it. There was never a Keith. There was never an Annette. There was never a Boh. There was never a James or Louise. There was only awakeness. And it was just believing that it was limited to this unit. It was just believing that it was a mind. Because every belief, every experience of suffering that we experience is based on being this separate self. So the more and more we see that there isn't that to begin with, it's impossible. There's only oneness. There's one thing going on. The less stickiness thought has. So that's one one aspect of that question. I see, Keith, you're talking about worries and anxieties. That's just reflexive conditioning. That happens, with a life lived and fueled by the belief in separation. That conditioning will naturally happen. There's plenty of anxiety here in the conditioning here, because I've spent most of my life believing that I was this unit or something, trapped inside the unit, that I believed I was a separate self, separate to life. And so whenever that anxiety comes, that it's very common to experience a lot of this really difficult emotional patterning in post-awakening, because all of this stuff comes up to the surface to be clarified and looked at. It's like, okay, true nature recognized itself. Now this is all this stuff to see through. This is all this stuff that you've been believing about yourself. These are all the stories that you've been believing about yourself. And so it doesn't feel pleasant. I'm not suggesting that it does. But it's actually part of life's self-clarifying process. It's a very natural movement that it's actually doing out of love for itself. So, yeah, I guess my advice would be to meet that experience with one inquiry, saying, well, who is it that's unsafe? Or, is it really true that there's a Keith here? Is it really true that I actually feel like I'm separate, given that there isn't a Keith and that there's only awakeness? Is that actually in my experience? Because we believe in individuality, we believe in separateness, because we don't investigate it first. That's just the default. But when we look, see, well, okay, what's actually my experience? What is actually the experience here? Is it true that is my experience as whatever I am, that I'm separate? Or does it just seem that way because I'm asking that question or seeing from the lens of the character, the lens of someoneness, Keithness, Bohness. I mean, as the the nickname conveniently provides, bonus is a bonus. It's not it's not necessary. It's just an extra overlay um, onto what is. So it's not actually. It makes us feel more unsafe to believe in separation than it does to let go of that tendency, to see through that tendency. From the perspective of the mind, it needs belief. It needs awakeness to believe that it's something, permanent, that it's here as a discrete entity. It needs that because it's transient. It constantly moves with this motive of appearing to be real. And so, from its perspective, safety can only happen once belief in separation is cemented. Safety can only happen if awakeness believes that it's actually something separate, because then the story of Keith can continue. But, I don't have to worry about what kind of chaos and, problems the Prime Minister of America is causing all over the country, because there isn't a Prime Minister of America. So even if I, every now and again feel compelled to believe that, oh my goodness, the Prime Minister of America is just completely ruining things. Like, I don't know how the 2024 election is going to go because the Prime Minister of America is just, causing all this chaos. So many problems are happening because of the Prime Minister of America. All I have to do is see, is it true that there's a Prime Minister of America? And it won't take long to notice, oh, that's actually it's not true. There's never been a Prime Minister of America. So I don't have to worry, even if my phone gets alerts talking about the crazy stuff that the Prime Minister of America is doing. I don't have to believe them just because the notification is there or the thought arises. So in inquiry, just meet the thought with, is it really true that I need to believe this? Is it really true that I, awakeness, need to believe this thought, that I'm a Keith, or I'm a Boh, or a Net? Yeah. No, that makes sense. And that is the default. We're very used to, and it's just the wiring, right? We're used to equating familiarity with safety. But really, familiarity, all that is just a perpetuated story in the background. And if that's causing more suffering than comfort, then, it may be worthwhile to see, is it, true that that it's actually helping. So the sense of control, I mean, who needs to be in control? You know, it, the sense of someone needs to feel in control, because if it's in control, it's here, it exists. It's impossible for there to be a sense of that, for there to be an actual self. It's not possible for a self to be in control. It's like, there actually being a monster under your bed. Familiarity feels like control. Yeah, I get that. It feels like control because it feels like there's safety in being the one that life is happening to and for. Imagine safety. It's not true. There's safety to the belief in a net. It's safe for a net if awakeness believes that it's actually there. But there isn't a net to begin with. So, what safety is actually available to something that isn't here anyway? It's just all these stories and ideas are a distraction for awakeness to just stop and look and see, oh, there's just this as it is. This is already whole and complete. This is already fine as it is. In the felt sense of this, there's just this okayness. If it doesn't feel that way, that means we're preoccupied with the thought. And I'm not saying that it always feels peaceful or anything like that, but I just mean that if that angle of things isn't accessible, then we're paying more attention to the story than we are the actual felt sense of experience. We're paying more attention to our thoughts about experience rather than the felt sense of experience. Yeah, that's right. It's a defense mechanism. Yeah, fear, guilt, shame, all those patterns come up when that sense of someoneness feels threatened. Like, oh, the jig is up, you know. The emperor isn't wearing any clothes. So it's understandable. It's innocent. Just like a an organism naturally strives to preserve itself and to survive. That's a natural movement of nature. You can think of it the same way with egoic patterning, because it's nature expressing that way is one way of looking at it. Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. Because when we return to the sense of being, we're returning to, we're remembering home. We're returning attention to what is, which is inherently free from all the stories about it. We're returning to the inherent freedom that we are, the indivisible, spacious aliveness that we are, that isn't actually ever captured or defined by the ideas that the mind spews. So it makes sense that it would help anxiety. So yeah, that would be my suggestion. When there is anxiety, meet it with inquiry and return attention to the sense of being and just stay there. And recognize that it has to be the sense of being that's returning to the sense of being, or remembering the sense of being. James has another question. How is the living method useful for those in long-term recovery, sober and clean from an addiction? So Freedom Beyond Recovery is a recovery program that specifically deals with the addiction to self. It doesn't aim to remedy, addiction, conventional addiction. It can certainly help. I've found that in my own experience. But it's not the same as AA or other programs where it's something that you can use if you're, still in active addiction or still, um, in the muck of addictive patterning. So Freedom Beyond Recovery, the living method, can help deepen the spiritual aspect of conventional recovery because it's like AA and other programs, it's a spiritual program. So it's based on a similar premise that the remedy of addiction, that tendency to avoid and self-soothe and escape, is based in remembering God, right? To reconnecting with God. That's kind of how it's phrased um, in AA. And it's similar with the living method, right? It's instead of remembering God as something separate, it's recognizing that there isn't anything else other than God, that there's only spirit, there's only awakeness. And that what was perpetuating the dis-ease, the irritability, restlessness, and discontent of conventional addiction is this core addiction to the belief in being separate, um, and the pain from the insanity of believing that that could ever be the case. And so, Freedom Beyond Recovery and the living method can help address the default tendency in selfishness and self-centeredness and um, the ways of functioning in the world that are very much based in the conditioning of believing that we're a self. It can help those dissolve those patterns, and that extends into every area of life, not just conventional addiction recovery. Being a better um, community member in a recovery group, it in my own experience, it makes a huge difference in being a husband, being um, a son, being a friend. It radiates and overflows into all areas of human life. So it's looking into the addiction to self is one of the most pragmatic and practical things that we can do if it's available to explore. Hope that was helpful. I have no idea what I said. Louise says, I always felt scared of sending or feeling the anxiety. Now it's welcome to open up more. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something that is a very common and kind of characteristic of this process of clearing is being able to not avoid what is by imagining that we're something separate to it. And so the more and more, there's a very genuine and authentic yearning, you could say, to not resist this, because anything that arises, it's an aspect of ourself as awakeness. So when we resist anything in experiencing, we're resisting ourself, and that's inherently painful because it is a distortion of the love that we are. It's an inauthentic way of relating to ourselves. I mean, really, any kind of relation is inauthentic because there's only one thing going on. And naturally, suffering will overflow from that. So I can remember very vividly when my grandma passed away early this year, and one of the beautiful gifts of that experience was recognizing how how good it felt to feel the grief fully, as full as I was able to at the time, to just really without resistance express as this as an apparent human going through loss. It's non-duality is the absolute and the relative. It's not the denial of one in favor of the other. And so life naturally wants to, and this is just a way of talking, it's nothing that I'm saying is true. I can't tell you the truth. We can't say anything true. Words are by default lies. As Fred says, I can only lie to the best of my ability, to the degree that's accessible right now. So but it's very nourishing to be able to meet life as life and not separate yourself from it. Keith says, I mostly feel like an individual and that oneness is a concept. I have had very minor glimpses, but I guess it takes time and I'm still here. I think that's what it says. I'm still here. The heart is in the corner. Yeah, so I mean it is a apparent process. It takes time. That's why repetition is the mother of clarity, as Annette was referencing earlier. We just need to keep revisiting this present experience as this present experience, saying what's true now, Okay, is it really true that there's a Keith? Can I actually find that? You know, if you had to prove to me that there was a Keith, how would you do that? Asking these kinds of questions, getting to the root rather than getting distracted and preoccupied with these superficial concerns like, well, if there's no doer, then how am I going to make a decision about, this, that, and the other thing later in the week? Or, how do I, uh, get rid of this, achy elbow or whatever? I don't know. Whenever there's a concern, whenever there's suffering, whenever there's a belief, it's always, always, always best to go right to the source of who is that appearing to? Who am I believing myself to be? Is it really true that there's a separate self here? Because if we get lost in the details of relative life, we will just continue to tie ourselves in knots. And that doesn't mean dismissing relative life. Like I said, non-duality is a both and always. But when we're talking about relief from suffering, it's important to acknowledge that the problems that, Bohness or Keithness or Annetteness, Jamesness, churns out on a moment-to-moment daily basis, it causes problems for itself to solve so that it can apparently be here. And that's it. All thoughts are lies. This is taking care of itself. All we have to do is just recognize that and trust, and slowly loosen our grip on the idea that we're not already home as home. We're not already free as freedom itself. We don't need to add something to ourselves, to our experience. We just need to stop insisting that it's other than how it is. We don't need to wake up later. We need to recognize that we're already awakeness itself. And that's the only thing that's actually possible. So if it feels like you're an individual, look closer at what you believe yourself to be. Is it possible that Keith could believe that he's an individual, given that there isn't a Keith? It has to be oneness believing I'm a Keith. So given that there isn't a Keith, given that there's only oneness, is it true that this can't be the oneness experience? Is it true that the sense of individuality is the same thing as the truth of individuality? Yeah, Louise says, on Wednesday, James talked about where the inquiry starting point is, character or awakeness. This is a very powerful distinction over here. Yeah, I mean, that's the defining feature of the living method style of inquiry, is starting from, it can't be the separate self that's doing inquiry, it has to be awakeness. So from awakeness, let's get clear on all the beliefs that we're holding on to as awakeness, believing in separation, because that's the only way that those beliefs can effectively be cleared out. Because otherwise, we're just starting as an imaginary character that isn't here and constantly trying to solve an entity's problems to wake up something that isn't here. that can happen forever, and it does. So freedom is more easily available from what you are and not from, living from what you're not. That's what this whole program is about, living as and from what you are. Is attention a mode of awakeness? Yeah, you could say that attention is focused awakeness. I think that's how Fred describes it. But it's also, what are we calling attention? What feels focused, what feels localized is actually the sensation of the eyes, not awareness. Awareness isn't focused. Attention doesn't start anywhere. Can you find where attention starts? Awakeness has to first believe that it's looking like that it is looking through the eyes, is as that way of framing it. But awakeness has to believe that it's more more here than anywhere else. Like that the unit is more of a starting point than anything else, and that's what creates this idea of attention being focused from the unit. It's just a misperception. They're in the absence of memory, right? Drop all language, drop all reference to the past and future. In the absence of internet, in the absence of this imaginary self, where are you? Where do you begin? Where do you end? I have no idea where the fuck I am. There's just what's happening. Yeah, that's right. Nowhere. Where is where exactly? Yep. At the end of the day, if we have an answer to something, I'm here, or it's like this, we're dreaming. We can talk like that, and it has relative utility, but it's not true. One day things will get clear, I'm sure. Well, that is just an opportunity to look at what's here already. If we continue to project into the future of I'll get there soon, that's just a way of distracting ourselves from what's already the case. Where's the clarity now? Not what can I do now to get clear later. Again, there, practices and all that stuff, there's relative practicality to it. I'm very for, doing inquiry, sense of being meditation, exploring with attention, and all these things. I think they're extremely helpful. They've certainly helped here with clearing. But a practice, if it is based on the idea of if I do this enough times, then something will happen later, that's a dream. It's not true. any practice, if it's a genuine, authentic practice, it's just a remembering tool. It's not a creating tool. The question, where am I? It doesn't change what's already the case. It just invites attention to notice. What does it notice? It's just noticing. Where does it go? Nowhere. There isn't any there isn't any where to go, because there's just this. It doesn't, where does attention move? Attention doesn't notice one place and another. It just, who is it that could get clear later? Yeah. Yeah, and it's okay, Keith. That's the frustration, that comes up. That's just an opportunity to meet yourself as the love that you are already. It's of course, like, if we've lived our whole lives believing thought, of course that would still happen. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's all we've ever known. What's offered now is just the opportunity of, trying to do something different. And that's just, it's not doing anything. It's just the conventional phrase. But it's the opportunity to remember, the opportunity to notice. Given that we've lived life a certain way and it's not working out for us, what's the invitation in that? What's the invitation in noticing that? It's the same thing with conventional addiction. That's right, Annette, unknowing. It's, I don't need to get somewhere. I don't need to have a better, different experience. I just need to unknow the beliefs that I've been holding on to all this time. I just need to unknow the idea that I'm a Boh, that there's a self here. And with that, all these the mystery and miracle of this just unveils itself. It's already here. It's already this. When I was when I first got sober, I needed to suffer enough to really give sobriety a try. And that's with all the various addictive patterns I've had to deal with and continue to. It's life has to twist the unit's arm enough for change to actually, for that willingness to be cultivated and actually, it has influence. That noticing, okay, I keep running into the wall. Maybe I should not run into the wall anymore. I keep believing I'm a Boh. Maybe I should stop doing that. Maybe I should look and see if there's actually a Boh here. I keep believing thought. Okay. It doesn't make me feel better to believe thought. It doesn't make me feel better to believe that I'm limited. Let me look closer at that. We can spend an eternity just, kicking our shins out of frustration that, oh my goodness, I've spent all this time believing that I'm a self, and I just keep doing that. Like that's just a way of making this about Boh again, or Annette, or Keith, or James. Throwing yourself a pity party is the best way to keep the story of self alive. Because that's all it wants. It just wants to apparently be here. It doesn't matter what the story is. I noticed that in my most visceral, tumultuous moments of suffering, when I truly felt that I was such a piece of shit, that I was the scum of the earth, that my existence was God's mistake, there was still comfort that I'm here. Well, at least I'm here. I might be the worst thing to ever happen, but at least I'm here. But that's not necessary. Safety, the peace that we're looking for in believing stories about ourselves is completely available in between each thought, in the background of each thought, in the space between the words. It's right here. Just have to notice it. Okay. I think we went a lot longer than I thought I initially stated I would, but I'm not doing this anyway, so it does what it does. Sorry. I like the pity party thing. There's a lot of desire to feel sorry for myself. Yeah, that's it's just another drug. Yeah, exactly. Just like Louise said, suffering is the alarm clock in the dream. So seeing it instead of as an obstacle that I keep running into, it's just look at the gift that life keeps giving me. It's actually an appearance of love. It doesn't feel like that way, of course, but that's what it is. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, James. I hope this was useful, and look forward to seeing some of you on Wednesday. All right. That's all for now. Thank you. Bye.